Good morning. It is a beautiful day outside. Sunday morning. That's the day of which I'm recording this. I made this story yesterday on St. Valentine's Day. The thing is, why would a man without any relationship or any sexual relations be making a romantic movie? That is the question. Now, I'll tell you. My friend suggested it a year ago. If I'm gonna make any movie, he said that I should make a romance movie. I do not know why, but I still finish this story. So the thing is, when I make this film, the only reason for making the film will be money. It's the only reason I would ever make a romance movie. Now, if you do not like sexual intercourse, you will not like one scene in this. I don't know why I wrote that, but that seems to make money. I don't know why, but as they say, sex sells. Now, let the story begin.
Alarms go off. One says 6 a.m. The other says 8 a.m. Dark and pink. The man in pink gets up, brushes his teeth, then showers. The woman in dark. She goes to take a shower, then she brushes her teeth. Both leave their house. The man bikes to work. The woman drives her car to go to her job. The man works, and once he's at his lunch break, he goes to a coffee shop, a cafe. Once at the cafe, he stands in line until he thinks he has the time to order. He orders his brunch from a seemingly tired woman in dark colors. The man gets his food, attracted to the sight of the woman. Later that night, the man is riding his bike on his way home when he sees the woman. They exchange glances as her seemingly old car has a flat tire. The man asks the woman for her name, and what she responds is, "None of your business." The man in pink says, "His name's Louis." The woman says, "That's an old name." Louis tells the woman to watch her language. He says, "I don't give a Louis." Louis rolls his eyes, then asks if she needs help. She says, "What do you think?" Louis notices that she has a flat tire, and he responds, "There's a car repair shop about 4 blocks down that way, but it closes in about an hour, unless you have a spare." The woman says, "What do you expect, huh? You expect me to push my car all the way to the repair shop?" He says, "Fair point. How about I let you take my bike there? You go there and back, get a tire." The woman says, "And let you jack my car? No." He says, "Okay. How about this? I'll bike to the shop, and I'll come back. And let you just strand me here in the middle of the road?" Louis says, "All right, fine. I'll keep my bike here. I'll run there, run back, and get the tire." She says, "All right, if you say so." And so he does. He runs to the store, runs back. Once he comes back, the woman is on her phone, just watching whatever it is that's amusing her on her phone, and she says, "Took you long enough?" Louis rolls his eyes. Then he starts to replace the tire. And once he's done, the woman says, "Yeah, cool, great." Louis gets on his bike and says, "You're welcome." The woman rolls her eyes, and she drives off as Louis tries to ask again for her name. Alarms go off. One says 6 a.m., the other says 8 a.m. Louis takes a bit longer today as he's a bit tired from what he had to do yesterday, since he stayed up slightly later than before. The woman gets up slightly faster today. A bit unusual, but not much of a difference. Louis gets to his work, and he works for a while. Once he's done with his job for the lunch break, he he decides to take his lunch break slightly earlier, but still has the authority to do that. Once at his lunch break, Louis stands in line until he thinks he has the time to order. And so once he orders, he does the same thing as before. The woman says, "Really? You again?" Louis says, "It's not my fault that you have good food. This place is great food." The woman rolls her eyes. Louis then asks if he could get her name. And she says, "No." Louis then says, "How about dinner?" The woman feels the growling in her stomach since she still doesn't have enough money to pay for the food and rent at her apartment. The woman then responds, "Fine, but you pay." Louis grabs his food, then he sits down, writing the address of the restaurant on a napkin. Once Louis is done eating, he gives the napkin to the woman. The napkin says the location and the time of where they're going to go to the restaurant. Later that night, Louis arrives at the restaurant 5 minutes early to make sure that he's all ready. And then the woman gets there 15 minutes later. Louis says, "Must have been a lot of traffic out there." The woman rolls her eyes and says, "I'm only here because you fixed my car, you know? Only because you bought me that tire." Louis lets out a small chuckle. The man asks, "So what do you do?" The woman asks, "What do you do? Why am I here?" Louis responds, "Well, you look like a great woman. On the inside, that is. So, since I don't believe you're just an emo girl, you know?" The woman corrects him before he could finish his sentence and tells Louis, "Goth, not emo." Louis then says, "Well, goth then, but both of us are in our 30s, right? We don't have much time left in life and not much to achieve in life. So I thought, how about we just settle down? You seem like a great woman." The woman says, "So you want to..." Louis? Louis interrupts before she could finish her sentence. No, I don't want to do that. What I mean is settling down, you know? Life doesn't have much to offer. You know, once you're in your 30s, not much is left. And mostly because I find you attractive." The woman says, "Well, many men do, and when I was in high school, every boy did." Louis says, "Look, how about just think about it, you know? Just keep it in your mind, whether you want to accept that offer or not." Music starts playing in the background. Louis asks if the woman would like to dance. She says no. And then Louis starts to dance, letting out a small little dance. Louis says, "All right." And so he dances alone without the woman. She watches with investment and chuckles. She chuckles as much just seeing him dance, seeing how embarrassed he could be. Louis then sits down and says, "What all do you do in your normal day?" The woman says, "Sleep, work, listen to music." Louis asks if she does anything other than work at the coffee shop. She says no. Louis says, "Well, I had thought a goth chick like you would work at a Hot Topic or a Spencer's." The woman laughs. Louis says, "What kind of music do you listen to then?" The woman says, "Death rock, goth rock, and dark wave." Louis says, "Well, I don't know those genres, but For me, I listen to indie music and, well, what you would probably call old music. The woman then, once that's part of the conversation's done, the waiter arrives and they order their food. And once they're both done ordering their food and the waiter leaves, Louis says, "Geez, you must be starving if you're gonna eat all that." The woman rolls her eyes. Louis asks, "So where do you live?" The woman says, "The apartment complex on South Street." Louis says, "No way. I live in that same building. I live in C19. How about you?" The woman says, "C7. The food arrives at the table. Louis says, "Well, it seems you're on the other side of the hallway for me." The woman says, "Yeah, it seems so." The woman starts eating and says, "How can you afford this, though? You know? How about you? Because you're paying for food for me and you bought a tire. I don't think that's much of a cheap expense." Louis says, "Well, I work at a car company. I design cars, and that pays more than enough for my apartment bills." The woman looks at him and says, "You make cars, but you don't use one because you use a bike?" Louis says, "Well, yeah, that does seem so, but it's really only due to money because it's cheaper to own a bike and I get more exercise." The woman asks if Louis is going to eat because he's still sitting there and talking. So Louis starts eating. Once both Louis and the woman are done eating, Louis pays the check and asks if she would like to take up his offer. Even give him her name. The woman says, "I might take up your offer, but give you my name, you'll have to earn it." Louis looks at her with confusion and says, "I'm not sure what you implied when you said earn it, but how about tomorrow? I'll take you shopping. Maybe you could get less revealing clothes than that." The woman rolls her eyes, then agrees. The next day, an alarm sounds at 6 a.m. Louis gets prepared for the day that he's going to have with this woman. And he heads to their room, C7, wearing his darker pants as he seemed to want to wear that today. There's a knock on the door at 7 a.m. The woman opens the door halfway and asks, "What made you wake up so early?" Louis says, "I think this is a normal time to wake up, and I'm not sure what time you wake up." The woman shuts the door. She gets ready for the day, taking 30 minutes to do so. She then opens the door with a red and black shirt on and asks, "Louis, do you need a car? To bring me somewhere?" Louis then says, "Well, you could also walk." The woman rolls her eyes and lets out a small laugh. They head to the woman's car. It seems not to start. Louis says, "Come on, the store's a mile away. We could just walk that much." It's not that much at all. The woman says, "I'll ride your bike, but you gotta walk." Louis says, "Fine." They get to the store. Louis says, "I'll get you food. The food that you want, but you go get the clothes on your own." The woman says, "You don't want to go get clothes with me?" He says, "I don't really go to that section. The woman lets out a small laugh. Lou grabs the food and notices the woman's taking forever. What's taking her so long? You know, if I were in that situation, I'd finish all that. I'd get all the clothes by now. So he hesitates, then he goes to the woman. It's the clothes section. Once in the woman's clothes section, he looks around. He's not able to find the woman. He looks around more, and then he sees nothing. And then he goes to the he goes to the dressing room near the women's clothes section and the men's clothes section, where he's pulled into a changing room. Where the woman says she'll take his offer to settle down, and so she gives him a kiss. Louis thanks her for her accepting of the offer, exception of the offer. Later, once all the items are ordered, the ones of which they needed, once they purchase them all, they walk back to the apartment, and on their way back, Louis says, you know, I never really had a crush on anyone recently, you know. I mean, the only other person I had a crush on was in high school, but that was a girl named Crystal. It seemed that she disappeared or something, because I don't know where she went. The woman looks at Louis with a slight embarrassment that he just doesn't see. Louis alters his conversation towards the woman and asks if she ever had a crush. She says, you think me, the person who had the highest body count in my whole school, would have a crush on someone? The scene ends. You arrive at 20 minutes later in the apartment. Louis organizes the bags and starts putting away the food in the fridge as he notices the woman disappeared again. And so he starts looking again, searching around for where the woman is. He goes into the woman's bedroom to see if she's in there. The door shuts. And the woman says, let's see if you deserve my name, though. Let's see if you deserve to find out what it is. A scene of sexual intercourse ensues. And once it's over, the sheets covering both people. Both of them are covered by the sheets. You cannot see anything more. The woman leans her head on Louis' shoulder and whispers in his ear, my name's Crystal. And when I said I never had a crush, I lied because I felt the same way for you back then. Or you would say before I turned goth. Louis lets out a small laugh. The film shifts to later that night, where they're now back at the same restaurant they were yesterday, where Crystal's perfume fills the air. As they share a waltz, Louis and Crystal sharing this waltz together. And in their last waltz they have together, this first time they have it, probably the last time they may waltz, the two people who once were lonely, now together, Louis shares that he loves the woman. He loves Crystal. The camera pans to a month later. Louis is now on a beach, sitting under the shade of an umbrella, on a towel, where Crystal stands in front of him. Tall, tan, young is subjective, but still lovely. And with that, the film ends. And Crystal says, I'm pregnant.
If you watch through that whole thing, I would like to say I'm sorry. I do not want to make this movie, I'm simply making it for money. Perhaps I'll just make the whole script, the whole everything, and then send it to some other director. Seems like the right way to go. Though, they'll say that it's written by me, which I did not really intend to do, only did this because I wanted money. Now the thing is, I need that money to make my final film, which is The Bright-Eyed Killer. But I also have 20 more movies. It's a bit hard to keep track of them, but I'll stay on track of making the rest. So now I'm sorry for making that film, and I do believe that that's supposed to be an interracial couple, so something there. Alright. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Looks like I forgot my free ad. Well, most of these songs I used to make that story, and the rest are just pretty good songs. Mostly about the season.